Morning Year 5, I hope you're well on this Tuesday morning. So we're going to start off today with reading, as we normally do. And remember, as I said before, we're going to look at skills this week rather than focusing on a book. So today's reading skill is inference. So remember, inference is reading between the lines, so it's not necessarily written down in the text, but from what you read, you need to try and imply what it's suggesting. So let's start with this text first then, the race. It was the final lap of the race, the 66th lap of the hair-raising 100-mile-per-hour madness. John was all set for the victory. Around the final bend he came, then bang, everything stopped. John could see the flashes of red, green and blue flying past and onto the finish line. He placed his head in his hands and sighed. So we're going to ask these two questions then at the end. How is John feeling at the end of this story, and why would he be feeling that way? So let's have a look at the clues then in here. How was he feeling? Well, at the end it says he placed his head in his hands and sighed. So that suggests that he's feeling sad or disappointed. And then why would he be feeling that way? Well, it was a 66 lap race and he was on the final lap, and on the final corner the car obviously broke down and he didn't win the race in the end. So on the very last lap of the final bend he had to pull out of the race, which is probably why he was feeling so disappointed. So this is how I would answer this particular question. So I would say, I think John would have been really disappointed and fed up because he thought he was going to win the race, but something went wrong with his car on the last lap. I know he was disappointed and fed up because he placed his head in his hands and sighed. Okay, let's have another go then. The trip. I can't believe I'm actually here. The towns below look so small and I can see for miles in every direction. The engine is whirring and there's a man in the aisle next to me eating crisps. Don't be afraid, it's natural to be a bit nervous, Mum said before we got on board. I'm definitely not nervous now, it's brilliant. So, a couple of questions to answer here. Who is speaking, where are they, and how were they feeling before they got on board? So again, some little clues. If Mum was speaking to that person, then if they're referring to it as Mum, then it's likely to be a child. And where they are, well, clues are that the engine was whirring and noisily, so and then there was a man in the aisle. So think transport vehicles that have aisles are buses, planes, and the very second sentence, it says the towns below look so small. So that implies they're on an aeroplane, doesn't it? That they can see from above, and the town looks so small from in the sky. So this is how I would answer this particular question. I think a child is speaking, and they were really worried about getting on board because their mum tells them not to be afraid. I think they're on an aeroplane which has just taken off. I know this because the engine is whirring and the towns look so small, so they must be quite high in the air. It also mentions an aisle, which an aeroplane would have. So really important phrase there when you're answering these types of questions is, I know this because. Okay, and on to maths then, and we're going to continue with our decimals theme for today. And today we're looking at subtracting decimals within 1. And I've split this lesson into two parts. The first part we're looking at solving these using a number line, and in the second part we're going to be using the standard column method. So using a number line then to solve these, if we place, we've got 0.5 take away 0.3. If we place these two numbers on the number line, you can see about where they sit between 0 and 1. Now I've placed 0.3 above 0.5 because we're not adding it on, so you can see that that part is going to be removed from 0.5. And in our next on our next number lines, we'll show this a bit in more detail now. So let's put 0.5 on again, as we did before, and this time we're going to overlap 0.3, and the idea with that is that you can sort of see what's going to be removed from 0.5. So if I get rid of 0.3 now, you can sort of see on the number line now below what our answer to that number sentence would be. So let's just confirm that with our number sentence. So we've got 0.5 take away 0.3 equals 0.2. Okay, and on to the column method that we're familiar with. So if you just pause the video now and you can have a go, and then on the next slide I will solve it. Okay, so let's see what I did with this one then. So we had to put that 0 in after the 0.45 to hold the place because we needed something to exchange onto. So we can't take 5 from 0, so we needed to exchange. So I borrowed from that 5 in the hundredths column, made that column now 4, and so now we're doing 10 take away 5 is 5, 4 take away 3 is 1, and 4 take away 1 is 3, making sure that my decimal points are in line. Put the decimal point in, and 0 take away 0 is 0. So it gives us our answer of 0.315. And don't forget, guys, to have a go at your times table rock stars. Look out for those battles which could come up during the week. And on to writing now. So following our titanium music video, we're going to be moving on to using relative clauses. Now remember, relative clauses are there to add extra information for the reader, and they're also a way of varying our sentences, which obviously we want to do when we want to engage our reader as much as possible. So one of the strategies is to use a relative clause at the end of a sentence. So that is where that arrow would be there. So we're going to add something about maybe the eyes in this. That's our noun there. You can see that in the text you've got frustrated, I closed my eyes. So we're going to add a little bit more to that. So what we could add, we obviously need to get rid of the full stop, and we're going to use a relative pronoun, and we could have something like frustrated, I closed my eyes as tight as I could, which I hoped would make the guilt disappear. Okay, moving on, then we could have an embedded relative clause, and that is going to go inside the sentence. Okay, so we're going to put our embedded relative clause, we're going to add a bit more again about the eyes in that bit where the arrow shows there. So remember, when we embed a relative clause, it makes sense on its own. Sorry, the sentence makes sense on its own. The relative clause doesn't make sense on its own, and you can take it out and put it back in. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So frustrated, I closed my eyes. Then we're going to need a comma now to separate the clause. So frustrated, I closed my eyes, comma, which were now overwhelmed with tears, comma. Okay, you need to close it off with your commas, and then you finish the sentence as tight as I could. Okay, so remember, if you take that red relative clause out, it should still make sense. It should be the same as what we had at the very beginning. Okay, and then finally you've got, we could attempt to put the two things together so we have a much longer sentence. So we're going to add a relative clause after frustrated, and we're going to put one at the end like we did at the very beginning. So we could have something like frustrated, comma, with my head in my hands, comma, I closed my eyes as tight as I could which only seem to amplify my sense of guilt. So again, we end up with a really long sentence there, and one good thing about that is it gives a good detailed description and allows us maybe to slow the story down if we want to at that point for the reader. So in your packs you will find you've got a couple of simple sentences, and your task is to add some relative clauses into those sentences.